This session is all about wrapping up the PEI tool, about planning for lesson closure. We're going to talk about how lesson closure is connected to the PEI tool, questions that you want to ask yourself while you plan for lesson closure, what the purpose of lesson closure is, as well as give you resources for the implementation of lesson closure. The learning target for today's session is I can purposefully plan for lesson closure. As a part of the Planning for Effective Instruction lesson planning tool, closure appears towards the end, as this is the opportunity to take your lesson and bring it to a close. We want to think about how we will summarize the learning that has occurred through this lesson and begin thinking about how students will communicate their understanding to you. While not every lesson you're going to teach is going to be planned in the PEI format, we still need to be sure that we are planful about lesson closure. Ultimately, closure can be just a few minutes of your lesson, but it can be hugely important for wrapping up big ideas of your lesson. So as you are planning, you want to ask yourself several questions. What's important to review or to summarize about your lesson? You might want to highlight some big ideas of learning or experiences that the students had during the lesson. How might you process individual and/or group behavior? Think about what processes the group or students individually went through as they did their learning. And then another, how will students share their understanding? This is when you can begin to think about the assessment aspect, whether that's formative assessment or summative assessment, that will be coming up for students to show how they understand the learning that took place in this lesson. The closure of a lesson can have one or more purposes. So when you're planning your closure, you want to consider what the purpose of your closure would be. Sometimes you want to review the key points of a lesson. Other times you want to give students opportunities to draw conclusions from the lesson. For a different type of lesson, you may give students the opportunity to describe when they think that they could use this new information, or for you as the teacher to actually give them future instances where they'll use the new information. Another purpose would be to preview the next lesson, or beyond that, any future lessons that would be connected. You could demonstrate students' problem-solving processes within the lesson, so this could potentially be an opportunity for them to show you their understanding. Along those lines, any way to exhibit student learning for students to show you what they understand, as well as creating a smooth transition from one lesson to the next lesson. So depending on what the purpose of your lesson closure is, it could hit one or more of these or others if you had them in mind, whether it's reviewing, drawing conclusions, previewing, or giving students an opportunity to exhibit or demonstrate their learning. These are all purposes of lesson closure. And when you're planning, you need to consider what the purpose will be. Once you actually implement lesson closure, you want to go ahead and revisit the learning target. And if you are using the Planning for Effective Instruction lesson planning tool, you've already created that learning target up at the top. But if you're not, you should still have your lesson centered around a high-quality learning target. You want to go ahead and summarize the learning for the students, remind them of what they've come away with and what the new learning is for this lesson. Go ahead and synthesize that objective of your learning and really consider if the students can articulate their understanding to you and/or to their peers. So the big idea with lesson closure is recapping the lesson and setting some next steps. Some ideas to help you as you get started planning for lesson closure. All of these ideas, which I'll walk through in a minute, can be implemented a little bit differently based on the purpose. So please remember that when you're planning for lesson closure, you do want to consider the purpose of the closure, whether that's to review, to synthesize, or to demonstrate student learning, and then that will help identify how you'll use one of these resources. One opportunity for lesson closure is an exit slip. These have great potential in regards to how you can use them, but the idea would be a routine in your classroom where students fill out or turn in some sort of exit slip, whether that's answering a question, working through a math problem, or even giving their opinion on a discussion. You could also try thumbs up, thumbs down. This would be when you post questions that would either be up or down responses. So you could have your questions up on the board or in a PowerPoint that would summarize the lesson, maybe have an opportunity for them to think through their learning of the day, and then to give a thumbs up or thumbs down. And you can quickly take a glance around the room and see how students are doing. If you're wanting to talk about the learning or to write about the learning, the elevator pitch or the $2 summary is a great way to close your lesson. The elevator pitch is where you have students summarize the idea or the lesson focus objective in 60 seconds or less. Think about pitching yourself in an elevator to someone that you've just met. So thinking of potentially about having students pair share with one another after they've had some time to think of how they would summarize what their learning was or the big idea in 60 seconds or less. You could potentially lower this as well to 30 seconds or 20 seconds, depending on the complexity of the learning that day. In regards to writing about the idea, a $2 summary, for instance, could be something along the lines of each word being worth 10 cents, and you try to write a $2 summary. Or again, you could change it to a different amount of cents and a dollar summary or something like that. But this gives students an opportunity to write about their learning for the day. A couple of fun ones include the snowstorm as well as the doodle. The snowstorm is where students have the opportunity to write about what they learned, crumple up their piece of paper, toss it, and go find another one, and then go ahead and read aloud. And hopefully their idea is different than the idea that they pick up. Again, a pair share could be a great opportunity here for students to share new learning besides their own. And then a doodle is really a creative way for students to show their understanding about some concepts that they have learned. You could have them use pictures or words to do so. If you need some more ideas about how to close your lesson, here are 4 links for more examples. You should have these links in your Google Classroom as well, but they are just great ways to get some more ideas about how to be very planful about your lesson closure, regardless of whether that lesson was in the Planning for Effective Instruction, PEI, tool or another way. It's very important to be planful about how you're going to close your lesson. Do not rush through the lesson closure. It really brings a good cap to the end of quality learning and can really be a great place for you to create some routines in your classroom.